Hello, and welcome to Sobercast, where we provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in podcast format. We're an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into our virtual basket. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Have a great day.
My name's Tim. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you all for being here today. Date of sobriety, 24th of July, 1993. My home group is Group 12 in San Antonio. I'm going to be talking about groups today, the home group. Now, these are my own views. I don't speak on behalf of AA. These are not AA's views, these are my views. I may change my mind. I've certainly changed my mind many times over the last 30 years, and I'm sure to change my mind again. And they're just preferences. There are a lot of things which all groups have in common, and then groups differ in all sorts of different ways. Those differences are to a great extent a matter of taste. So I'm going to say what my preferences are about home groups, but I'm going to explain why I have those preferences, and that might be useful. So what I think is neither here nor there, but the explanation might be helpful. So I've always been encouraged to have a home group. What is a home group? Well, in some places, they keep lists of members. I know in Bristol, you very officially become a member of a home group. In London, that's not the case at all. You just tip up. If you call it your home group, no one can gainsay you. So if I consider a group to be my home group, and it is my home group, there we go. What does it mean to have a home group? It means I go every week. If it's a multi-meeting group, I try to go to the same one every week in order to maintain some kind of continuity and predictability. It's important, I think, in AA to be findable and to grow roots and to be somewhere where people know you. It's been enormously valuable over the years to have. I had a home group, I think, 14, 15 years ago. I didn't much care for, but it was my home group. And when I needed very much to disclose some information to a bunch of people, I felt very comfortable doing so in my home group. As I said, I didn't care for the group very much, but it was my home group. I didn't enjoy it greatly. I didn't feel any great affection for the group, but it was a place I was able to share some quite difficult secrets. And I did so, and it was very salutary. I don't know if it saved me from a drink, but it was the right thing to do. There's something about a home group which enables that. Because everyone's got used to you, so they don't care anymore. When you're new, everyone's looking at you. Once they're used to you, they see you walk in, they say, oh, it's him. And then they go back to what they were doing. It's very safe. It's a strange old thing. What else does it mean? It means being willing to take my turn at service. It means being willing to do ordinary as well as fancy service. So tea and greeting and all of those more sort of ordinary things, as opposed to being the secretary or the chair or the GSR or something fancier. One of the common questions is, can you have more than one home group? Now, you ask this question in an AA online forum. You ask the question, you light the touch paper, and you stand well back because everyone's got an opinion on this one. In America, it's very common for a group to have many meetings a week. My home group has, I think, 78 meetings a week. That being the case, there is no need for a person to have more than one home group. In London, almost no groups have more than one meeting. Each meeting, by and large, is its own group. And a week is a long time. I was encouraged to have one home group, but to have a bunch of other groups, one a day, because I was told to go to a meeting a day, and I did so because I was told to, and it worked. I didn't drink. And so effectively, I had 7 home groups. There was one that was the real home group, but the rest I treated it as such, in that if they needed people to stack chairs or do the washing up, my little hand went up. If they wanted someone to read something, my little hand went up. If someone said, where are you going to be next Wednesday or Wednesday this coming October, I would tell them I'll be at Collingham Gardens Step Meeting in South Kensington. I didn't live in South Kensington. I lived in Walthamstow, but I did like having a group in South Kensington because I'm a horrible snob. There we go. But the point being that there was somewhere where I knew I was going to be, and I would have felt my absence if I hadn't been there. It's a very important thing against drinking. If you get up in the morning, you don't know where you're going to be, there's nothing wrong with walking past a pub at 7:10 in the evening. If at 7:10 in the evening you're supposed to be standing outside Collingham Gardens talking to Ian and Bobby, then you'll feel it very badly if you're walking past a pub at that time instead looking in through the window. So it was part of nailing me to the daily schedule, nailing me to the daily program that kept me sober in my first year. Very important. And I certainly encourage sponsees to do some sort of job at 2 or 3 different meetings, and if that necessitates doing that at 2 or 3 different groups, so be it. The one obvious exception is one shouldn't really take part in the running, the formal running of more than one group, and certainly not take part in decision making, which affects the fellowship as a whole. So conference questions should be dealt with only in one group. One shouldn't have one's halfpenny worth in half a dozen different groups on the same topic. Can you change home group? Again, they're terribly contentious questions, these. My view is, yes, you can. I don't like to make a habit of it. So I had the same group for about 11, 12 years, and I switched and I got a new home group about just over 2 years ago. And I'm not intending to change that quickly. My experience with AA generally is hasty decisions are rarely good ones. And group hopping and sponsor hopping and fellowship hopping and method hopping and religion hopping, all these hopping from place to place, because something rubs me up the wrong way. It doesn't do me good to be reactive to my own emotional reactions and suddenly make big decisions every time someone at my home group says something I find disagreeable. The advice to me has always been, become comfortable where you are and then see if moving is the right decision, with jobs, with relationships, with home groups, with sponsors. So yes, I have changed home group a number of times. I don't make a habit of it, but frankly, if something is profoundly miserable for a long time, there's no problem. I certainly don't feel obliged to see out a term of service if the whole thing is a catastrophe. If, by contrast, wherever I go, I find myself miserable, it wasn't the home group, it was me. I was the problem. Do you have to take part in running it? Now, I've changed my views considerably on this over the years. My view at the moment is there's nothing worse than a group conscience which goes on for 2.5 hours because everyone has to have their halfpenny worth. I'm much keener on having a skeleton crew running the group to keep the running to an absolute minimum. Obviously rotating that, those people are carefully selected. But too many cooks can spoil the broth. So I must make a distinction at this point. The running, it splits between the business meeting and the group conscience meeting. Now, in a lot of groups, in a lot of places, there is no distinction between the two. Someone says, we need new biscuits, let's have a group conscience meeting. Or we've got surplus money we need to send through the service structure, let's have a group conscience meeting. Now, according to the AA literature in Great Britain, I'm not as familiar with the AA literature in North America, but I think it's largely the same idea, is that you have group conscience meetings very infrequently, in the same way that conference is held once a year, which is infrequently. And group consciences and conference are for large matters of general policy and finance. So really big questions about the purpose, the ethos, the function, the fundamental functioning of the group. And these are to be held very infrequently, ideally at a time deliberately set aside, sometimes away from the venue, sometimes chaired by someone from outside the group, with an agreed agenda, with a start time, a stop time, so that the work gets done, and ideally standing up, so that people don't sit around and just talk for hours for the sake of hearing their own voice. So for very important matters, and everything else in between is dealt with by business meetings, which are small and sleek, with people who are very carefully selected by the group, who are known, safe pairs of hands, who are not going to cause trouble, who are just going to quietly get on with the job pragmatically and with the minimum of fuss in between. And if a genuinely major decision arises, those arise once every 5 years generally, unless there's a venue change which is necessitated, then you have an ad hoc group conscience and ask the group. But not to have these huge sort of stadium-like group consciences every 5 minutes because someone has a tiny question. So that distinction in the pamphlet, the AA group, is immensely helpful. Business meeting for the daily trivia, executive committee only, and then huge group conscience, everyone invited for major questions of policy and finance. And to make policy decisions in the group conscience, which then carry through the year. For instance, surplus funds over the prudent reserve are going to be channeled into the group structure. That's a very healthy way of doing that, because it saves having to refer every detail back to the group. So taking part in running it, I think it's important to take part, but only for periods, to not be permanently on the executive committee. So rotation doesn't just mean rotating between posts, it means rotating entirely out of the running posts. Doesn't mean you can't do the tea or something. But to have a fallow period, so that one isn't always in the driving seat in any sense at all, because it stops being a home then, it starts being a workplace. When I've stayed too long in the executive committee of groups, it's an absolute disaster. How to pick a home group? Firstly, to go to one where I feel fed spiritually. Secondly, to go to one where there is the opportunity to feed. One thing that's very common in strong parts of AA is people who are a couple of years in, who've completed the steps, often can't find sponsees in their home group because they're snapped up by the old timers, and they need to go to a terrible group with no old timers, where they're the only people in the room who've done the program, in order to find sponsees. So sometimes one has to branch out very, very quickly. Now I'm going to get on to the contentious bit, which is always the fun bit. Now these are very, very much my own preferences and ideas. They're not advice, they're not criticism, they just reflect my current feelings very much about AA. And I've got a little list of what I call red flags, which is groups I would be hesitant. I might be happy to go to them because they have wonderful meetings, but I would be very hesitant to be part of the running of them. And then white flags, so little waving the flag of surrender, groups where I'd be happy to surrender my service to. I'm not super keen on very large groups where especially newcomers can get lost. Anything over 70 or 80 people, 100 people, newcomers get lost very easily. No one knows who's who after a certain point. I watch out for high turnover of people doing service or no turnover of people doing service. Lots of rules and regulations in the opening announcements. I've been to groups where the sharing sounds scripted, where if you swapped people's shares, you wouldn't know because everyone is using the same phrases. Now, the content may be wonderful, but it's not to my taste. I like to hear people's real experience. I'm always wary when there are very frequent business meetings or very frequent group conscience meetings. My heart sinks at that prospect. Or very long business meetings or group consciences. I used to, and this is true for intergroups and regions as well. I used to be the chair of North East London intergroup, and we managed to get the intergroup meetings. Intergroup, if you're American or from elsewhere in the world, is like, I never remember if it's district or area. I think it's district, the one below, immediately below groups. We got the intergroup meetings down to 35 minutes. All of the business was done and dealt with, and we went home and had our tea and watched television, and everyone was happy with that. And so I would only join a group and take part in the running if everything was being run very briskly and efficiently without getting bogged down in lots of politics. And also, I would never join a group without looking at the past agendas and minutes of business meetings and group consciences. I would be very wary of long agendas, excessive organisation, persnickety proposals, hundreds of proposals originating an offence, upset or grievance, because sometimes the group conscience meeting can become the forum where people's own psychological stuff is played out, and it doesn't help the group, but there's an individual payoff there. I belonged to an al-anon group once, which was always coming in. And you see, this experience comes from over 30 years. It's not a reflection on anything present in my life in particular, because I've seen that you see the same thing again and again and again over the years. I was in an al-anon group many years ago. I think there's someone here who was a member as well. There was someone that kept bringing up, making proposals, which were essentially to regulate the behavior of other people in the group that this gentleman didn't like. And it made for a very, very tense atmosphere in the group conscience meetings, let me tell you. Someone gave me an acronym for control, and I always watch out for this going on in meetings. And I have been guilty massively of this in myself. I've changed a lot over the last 3 or 4 years, my approach to being part of the running of groups. To watch out for control. So when I'm tempted to criticize, to oversee, to nose into other people's business, to teach people how to do things within the group, to regulate how they do their service, to order people to do certain things. I've been ordered to do certain things by people in groups which I wasn't even a member of. And someone would come up to me, it happened quite recently, after a meeting and ordered me not to do something. I think I said thank you, and then went and got a cup of tea, which is my standard response to a lot of things. And legislation, control, criticism, oversight, nosing, teaching, regulation, ordering, and legislation. My old sponsor, Brian, was brilliant. He said, I mentioned this before, when you tame wild horses, you need a very strong paddock with a very strong fence in order for the horses to run wild within it, and then you have a hope of taming them. But they need to be able to run wild within the paddock. And he said, he taught me that that's how groups should be. Nice boundaries, starts on time, ends on time. There's clearly someone keeping an eye on things, makes people feel comfortable. The tea person is there on time. There are some big books and a meetings listing. You don't need much more than that to have a good group. And then let all hell break loose within it. white flags, the things I love about groups, because I find they're helpful, they're conducive to creating an atmosphere where people can be themselves, they can bring their true selves, because I think I can only heal where I can bring my true self. If I feel I have to perform or conform, I can't bring my true self. Part of me has to stay outside the door, and I have to go and collect myself on the way out. I can only heal if I can bring all of me into the group. So groups where people get there early and welcome strangers, where people know who is who and look out for people who they don't know, where people leave late, where they go for fellowship afterwards at a cafe, and where everyone is welcome for fellowship. I belonged to a group once where the smart people would go off to a fancy restaurant, and then all of the less attractive, less becoming newcomers would be left entirely in the lurch, and they'd rush off just to make sure that no one nabbed them. And I've done that myself, to my great shame. So you find some fancy, interesting people to run off for dinner with, thinking you're doing fellowship, and you're not. It's not fellowship in my book unless everyone is invited and everyone is genuinely given an opportunity. And what this means is you want to let people know where you're going. It needs to be somewhere really cheap, which means the food is going to be terrible. And you never complain about that, because you're not going for the food. You're going to give yourself an opportunity to share the program with other people, because the meeting is great. But as Don Pritt says, the real meeting is the meeting after the meeting. Anything which prevents people from coming, don't do it. Don't go to a restaurant where people feel awkward if they can't afford to pay for any food. There are places where the place may accept you without ordering food, where you just have a glass of water or a cup of coffee, but they won't like it and they'll make it felt. And people who are new usually have little to no money. So one's got to go somewhere where people feel completely free to come and just sit and have a glass of water. And of course, other people then buy them food and pile in and buy them coffees and so on. So cheap and cheerful, and it mustn't be chosen for the nutritional content of the meal or people's personal culinary tastes. It's all about creating a venue where you can sit with people in trouble. I used to belong to a group here in East London where for about 10 years, we went to the same restaurant. And people tried to divert onto other places. And the place we went to was terrible, but it was cheap, and they didn't mind if you just ordered a Diet Coke and a poppadom. And I'll tell you, there were times, the meeting finished at 7. There were times when we were sitting at the restaurant at 9 o'clock, 2 hours after the meeting left, and there was someone arrived, they'd crossed London to find the restaurant in the hope that we would still be there. And they found us, and we looked after them, and we had a great time. So it's important to have some continuity with that, because people will go to where the fellowship is known to be, having missed the meeting because they're too whatever to even get to the meeting on time, but they know where the fellowship is being held. So the worse the place is, and bad food, spacious and cheap, ideal. I like meetings where there's a good range of people, different ages, different backgrounds, different approaches to AA, different voices, different ways of doing things, friendly, relaxed atmosphere. One footnote, groups which are very strong, in my experience, will appear to be cliquey to newcomers or outsiders, only because everyone knows each other and is getting on like a house on fire. So if you're new and you go to a new meeting and everyone's chatting to each other, launch yourself into the middle of it. Ideally, people come and find you, but you have to take the initiative sometimes. What I find helpful, though, having said that about letting the wild horses run around and people be themselves, it does help if the group has a topic, a focus, a literature-based focus, so that at least some people talk about the program. It's great if people just talk about whatever they need to talk about, but as long as the message is heard you're good. Sometimes the newcomers, they can't hear the message, but they can hear the person that's talking about their week or some tangential topic vaguely related to the real topic. Sometimes very program-focused meetings where people only talk about the steps, newcomers have no idea what's going on. There's no foothold. So yeah, I feel you need a range of experience actually in the sharing. I also like meetings. I enjoy meetings where people share not just the ideas, but their actual experience of carrying them out, because we can all read the book. Now, you have to quote the book as well so that, you can present what the principle is. And repetition of quotations from the book does reinforce it. It goes into your brain after a while, and then it comes out of your brain at just the right moment, just when you need to hear it. Love and tolerance of others is our code. Once you hear that enough, you'll suddenly hear it when you're being beastly to someone, and you'll suddenly hear this phrase from the book. So repetition is great, but I like to hear people's stories as well. The only constraint which I found very helpful is to have timing, to have someone timing the sharing and to ring a little bell, or on Zoom to unmute and say time. The reason being, if there is a limit to the time sharing, there's a limit to the damage that can be done to the content of the group by people who are off topic or mentally ill or whatever else. You can stand anything for 3 minutes, and there's enough opportunity in an hour meeting for enough people to carry the message. If there's, in my experience, I don't like timing, but the alternative, what you'll often end up with if there is no timing, is a 1 hour meeting with 6 people who share out of 30, 40 or 50, and 5 of those are people who are very unwell and just come and share their life because there is no one else who will listen to them. And that's a valuable service for them, but it's not great for the group. And then you have to come at the question of how do we fulfill our primary purpose in a much tougher way to try and curtail that and get other people to come in and share. And say, the easiest thing to do, just have the timer, and that whole problem takes care of itself. I've never seen that fail as a method. It's simplicity itself, and it's perfectly democratic because everyone gets the bell rung at them at the same point. 3 minutes, boom, you're done, or 5 minutes, boom, you're done. And also the other thing, for a group to be small enough for anyone who wants to share to be able to. And it's not just burning desires because someone has had a terrible day and needs to vent. Sometimes, and it's true for me, it's true for other people, the most valuable 3 minutes of the day are the 3 minutes when I get to share some of the AA program at a meeting. And without that, the day loses something. There's nothing more frustrating than going to a meeting and having your hand up from the beginning of the sharing and still not getting the chance to share. Bob, Dr. Bob, said that groups lose a lot of their effectiveness if they go above, I think, 35 people. And I think that's part of the reason why. You go above 35, it's really difficult to get everyone who wants to participate to be able to. One little solution is a group I go to on a Saturday where they have a 10-minute round of 10 times 1 minute shares. And that's great because lots of people get a chance to just be part of the meeting and say something. I'm going to talk about safety in meeting. I'm not going to use the dreaded term safeguarding because it's a technical term under law, and I don't like using it in AA because I'm not a lawyer, but I'll talk about safety. So I think groups absolutely should be safe. There's an awful lot in the literature about that. So it's amazingly rare, actually, considering what we're like, how little trouble there is, frankly. You go to the local accident and emergency room, and you'll see a lot more trouble than you will in your average AA meeting. But one's got to be alert to stalkers, sexual predation, or people who inappropriately introduce sexual content to their sharing, to their personal interactions. I think those are a real verbal or physical aggression. But my experience, that's very rare. It's vanishingly rare. Sexual predation is probably the most common example of that, and the inappropriate sexualization. But the stalkers seem to be rare. The real verbal or physical aggression seems to be rare. Sometimes an atmosphere can develop in a group where people construe all sorts of things, like being challenged, being criticized, when people set boundaries with other people, construing any type of interaction that a person doesn't like as harassment. And of course it's not. This is part of the rough and tumble of human behavior. You act in a certain way, people will push back. When people are pushing back against my behavior, I'm not being harassed, I'm being boundaried. And there's a big difference between harassment and boundaries. And the danger is that this can escalate where and I've seen this happen a number of times over the years, where in the group there develops an atmosphere of suspicion and hostility and allegations and accusations and counter-accusations, and there are these shady, malign forces going on beneath the surface, and no one wants to hold a kangaroo court, but they want the accusations to stand on the record. And once it goes down that path, it's very difficult to pull it back. Very often groups collapse following that, because there is a fundamental loss of trust. In groups with a lot of conflict of that variety, I think my observation, it's a speculation, I suppose, as well, is I think the reason it's so difficult to solve is because the conflict is the purpose. It's not an accidental byproduct, it is sought. I've sought conflict. I loved conflict because when I created a conflict, suddenly everything was your fault, not my fault. And that I don't normally like using psychological terms or ideas as I'm not trained, but one that I do use, but because it's so incredibly helpful, is the notion of the Karpman drama triangle, where you have a little triangular relationship between the victim, who is the person who is being persecuted, the persecutor, and then the rescuer. And this little Karpman drama triangle very frequently gets activated, in my experience, in AA groups, where someone feels very aggrieved, and then everyone, or not everyone, a lot of people don the mantle of the rescuer to come in, and then they start persecuting the person who is the purported persecutor. But it's all on hearsay. Just because someone said something was said doesn't mean it was said. You want to hear both sides, but even then you don't. They're almost impossible to adjudicate these situations unless you have a recording of what was said. People do not report. I don't report accurately. Other people don't report accurately. I've seen so many situations in AA where I've observed a ding-dong happen between two people, and you hear the two people reporting it afterwards, and you wouldn't recognize they were in the same interaction. So when groups try to resolve these, they're on a sticky wicket from the get-go, because what is being activated is this whole dynamic where I feel aggrieved, I'm the victim in the situation, I figure out who the perpetrator is, I inveigle rescuers to come onto my side. We then switch places. I start persecuting the person that I thought was the persecutor, and it all goes round in the most horrible circle, and it goes on and on and on. And I would do that for years in all sorts of relationships in my life until I got well. That's why the group didn't cause it, it can't control it, it can't cure it. So when I detect that's going on, I can detect that's going on because my whole body tenses up and I stop breathing, because I understand instinctively that this system has been activated. I back off slowly and politely and run for my life. It cannot be fixed, so I don't try. I just go somewhere else. And fortunately, there are enough other groups. This is the great thing. You can just go to another group. So I do. What else? One example of that, because I think an example would help. I saw a situation with a group a number of years ago where someone didn't turn up. Someone very, very new, who was unknown to the group. And that's a key fact. Very new, unknown to the group, put their hand up to do the tea. Now, it's very common for some reason in AA to get the newest person in the room to do the most responsible job, the sine qua non, the one job where you can't have the meeting if the tea person doesn't turn up. So you give it to the person that's 3 days sober. Good job. No, you give the tea commitment to someone who is 1 year sober, who has proved that they can show up week after week and knows how to buy milk. That sounds like an obvious thing to be able to do, but you would be surprised. Anyway, the job was given to this poor little newcomer who was very unwell, had problems other than alcohol. And they didn't turn up for 2 weeks out of 3. And the group very gently tried to say, you know, is this the right commitment for you? Are you, do you really want to do this? Maybe, you know, you could share it with someone else. And the person turned it into this: I'm being persecuted, I'm being harassed, I'm being bullied, and it went up to the it was just the biggest shit show you've ever seen. These situations need to be handled, if they can be handled at all, with absolute love and tolerance, but moved swiftly on and look after the good of the group. The danger when these start is that as a friend of mine says, the craziest person in the room is calling all the shots. And you've got to look after the good of the group and make sure that the jobs are getting done and not everything has to be responded to. You hear it, concept 5. People's voice is heard, you minute it, and then you move on. And if in doubt, you have a vote, and the group almost invariably makes the right decision. The traditions. I'm going to say a little bit about the traditions in groups. So tradition 1, and this isn't an exhaustive presentation on the traditions in groups. There's a lot that could be said. You could talk for an hour on each tradition. I'm not offering that, by the way. Tradition 1, uniformity is the enemy of unity. If you require everyone to be the same, not everyone can be there. There are groups where they literally tell people what to wear. Sponsors tell sponsees what to wear on the basis that you're not attractive unless you're a man wearing a suit or a woman wearing a skirt. Where even if you don't wear a tie for work, you have to put on a tie to go to the meeting. Uniformity is the enemy of unity. I was always taught in AA, come as you are. Doesn't matter. The other thing I've been encouraged to do is to be very careful about signaling wealth or lack of it, education or lack of it, occupation, achievements, any biographical things which pin you down. They can be terribly divisive, in my experience in meetings. I love not knowing in the meeting. I mean, your friends in AA, you know what they do, you know where, you know about them. But to go to a meeting and to hear someone share and to have no idea where they live, what they do, what they've achieved, whether their life is great on the outside or terrible on the outside, because you want to know how they're feeling, what's their experience of their life. There are some places where this is more egregiously breached than others. London is not bad about that. People, I think, are quite good about being discreet about their external lives. And also what I was told is dress down, not up. You're not going to a party. You're not there to attract attention to yourself. Just come as you are. It's not an event. It's something else. It's a spiritual entity. They say with yoga, wear something comfortable. And I think that's not bad. Also, it means if you need to run for it, you can. That's the other thing about wearing something. And that has happened. I've been punched in AA meetings. I know you'll find that very difficult to believe, but yes, I have. I had it coming, actually. But anyway, that's another question. Tradition 2. If you have to solve a problem, solve it in the business meeting of the group conscience. No back channels, no backroom deals, no solving things by circular email, no solving things on WhatsApp groups are the absolute enemy of the group conscience, because there is no God in WhatsApp as far as I can see. You have people looking at each other in the room and they won't dare say things they would say on the WhatsApp. So to just read, you can do administrative stuff, but anything substantive, have a proper business meeting with group conscience. Tradition 3, no explicit or implicit rules, no jargon. Sometimes groups have their own little jargon, and it's very hard for outsiders to come in. I'm going to be a bit naughty. In part of America, there are groups called the Big Book Step Study, and they're wonderful. I've been to some, they're absolutely wonderful. The content is wonderful, but some are very kind and generous and allow everyone in. But some, if there is a suspicion that you haven't been sponsored by someone from a Big Book Step Study, they'll test whether you're familiar with Big Book Step Study jargon, and if you can't define the jargon or show that you understand the jargon, they'll ask you if you've been sponsored by a Big Book Step Study sponsor. If you haven't, you're not allowed to share. You're allowed to be present, but you're not allowed to share. Now, under Tradition 4, the group is allowed to do that. I don't think it's breaching, because it's letting everyone in. Tradition 3, it's allowed to do that. But it wouldn't be my ideal for my home group to have 2 tiers of attendance, the people who are allowed to share, the people who are not allowed to share. Part of Tradition 3 for me is not only can you be here, but you can really be here. You don't have to have done step 5. And when I got sober, there were groups where if you hadn't done step 5, you couldn't share. And they would interrupt you and say, have you done step 5? And if you said no, they'd say, well, we'd ask you just to listen for now. And again, groups are allowed to do that under Tradition 4. It wouldn't be for me. I want to hear the people who are 2 days sober. Tom Weston tells a great story about a meeting in the People's Republic of Berkeley, where they had some incredibly abstruse topic. It was something like recovery as a fundamentally revolutionary act. And that was it. And everyone shared about recovery being a fundamentally revolutionary act. And then there was a newcomer, and the newcomer apparently, when he came to his chance to share, said, I'm sober 2 days. I'm hoping to stop shaking sometime soon. And the group burst into laughter because they realized how far up their own arses they were. So I want to hear everyone. I don't really care as long as it's not disrespectful to anyone in the room. So if people are obviously, one mustn't have a go at someone else in the room, openly criticize someone else in the room or attack it. But as long as it's kept to one's own experience, strength, and hope, anything goes, because God is not limited by human limitations, seems able to speak through anyone. And God can speak through my listening. It is how I hear what is said that is the activator of the carrying of God's message. And that can work through anything. So I don't think it needs that. The sharing does not need that kind of control, I don't think, and it allows everyone to feel part of. And also, I always try and avoid in-jokes. I always make sure that what I say in an AA meeting, in my home group, would be understood by anyone who is in their first few weeks of AA. Sometimes it's not possible to speak in such a way that someone at their first meeting would understand everything. You're talking about later steps at times, but no allusions to shared history, which anyone who's only been in the group for 5 years will will understand. So these little devices that happen sometimes, which create an in group and an out group within the group, that like the core and the everyone else. There's a story in Al-Anon about a group that declared itself to have charter members, who are the ones that started it, and they declare themselves to be in a different class than other members, and they were given very short shrift by the Al-Anon head office when someone went to write to them about this. And also, I know it's popular in some places, but no quizzing of people or qualifying them to make sure that they are genuinely eligible to be there. I've seen that happen. I find it personally very distasteful. The chance that my local AA group is suddenly going to be overrun by people who want to become AA members by deceit or subterfuge is the chances, I think, are very remote. There were for a while some people who were members of another fellowship who I don't think were alcoholics. I think by their own admission, they weren't really drinkers. To be an alcoholic, you've got to be a drinker. But they said, we have a desire to stop drinking. We want to be here. Now, there are groups where that would have been frowned on, and some people got very exercised about it. I didn't care. It didn't do any harm. Seemed to do them some good. And it's not like the next week there were 200 people there saying the same thing. It was just a couple of people for a couple of years, and that was the end of it. What else? Tradition 4. I was once in an Al-Anon meeting where someone said, if this group does not sort itself out, it will be a viable target for hostile takeover by the so-and-so group. You want to watch yourself. Now, I don't think this person had read the Al-Anon service manual or the traditions, but in London, groups leave other groups alone. There are places in the UK where if you start a meeting and other people don't like the fact you've started a meeting, at a particular location at a particular time, they'll tell you and they'll try and get it shut down. And there are a couple of places, I'm not going to say out of discretion, I'm going to say where it is. In London, no one really cares. You leave them to it, and the market decides whether two meetings near each other at the same time are viable or not. Very often in Islington on a Saturday morning is crawling with with AA meetings. You can't go up a street without falling over, people queuing up to get into, all at the same time around Islington. And it's fine, it works perfectly well. So leave everyone else to it, and that they'll leave you to it. And it's okay to be different. It's okay to do things different. As I say, everything I've said is not how things should be. It's how I happen to like it, and I've explained why. And if that's useful, great. And if it's not, don't worry about it. I'm sure I've upset half the room, but there we go. Tradition 5. So to stick to the AA program, I do go to meetings which are not strictly, they're not listed fellowship meetings where we do talk about particular spiritual techniques or approaches, but in my AA groups, I don't. In my Al-Anon groups, I don't. I save that for fellowship afterwards. And this isn't a fellowship meeting, it's not listed, as far as I'm aware, as a regular recurring. It's not an AA group, it's something else, it's a workshop. So we can talk about other things, we can talk more freely, but in an listed AA meeting, I have to make sure that what I'm saying is kosher AA, ditto Al-Anon, that it's kosher Al-Anon. So I use the big book, but I never ever say so, at least I hope I never say so, in an Al-Anon meeting itself. I might allude to things from within there and people understand it, but you're sort of representing the fellowship as a whole to some extent. The newcomer doesn't know that you're not representing AA. They're going to assume you're representing AA. So they'll learn pretty quickly. But I stick to, there is enough to talk about within the AA program without pulling in other things. There's plenty forever. And so also in AA meetings, I try and keep religion out of it, psychotherapy out of it, medication out of it, medical problems generally out of it. because there's enough else to talk about. Tradition 7, this is a contentious point. Strictly, the pot should not be passed, in my view, at AA meetings where everyone, including visitors and people who are not group members, are putting money in. Most AA groups in London, everyone is encouraged to put the money in, whether or not they're group members. The tradition talks about the group being supported by the voluntary contributions of its own members. So I wouldn't enforce that with anyone, but I only give to my home group at the moment. I don't put money in the pot. I've stopped putting money in the pot of other meetings. But I make sure that what I'm putting in covers the costs of the group plus a contribution to the fellowship as a whole. So it's important for a group when it's pricing up how much it costs. So it's helpful in the announcement, the Treasury announcement, to say this group costs X, and for X to include a contribution to the local AA and to the national AA, so that the group is pulling its weight. Tradition 8. It's very difficult to talk about lots of these traditions without talking about things which have gone wrong. So I don't mean to be critical as a matter of point, but one has to sometimes use the negative examples to illustrate the point. So please forgive me for that. Tradition 8, so non-professionalism. When someone's got an outside relevant skill, it's probably best not mentioned. I was in a meeting many years ago where a gentleman who was speaking, he gave a half-hour talk. He said as part of it that AA won't do anything for your low self-worth. To get rid of your low self-worth, you definitely need therapy. And another part of his talk, he mentioned that he was a therapist who specialized in helping people with low self-worth. So it didn't take Einstein to put 2 and 2 together. And the gentleman in question, I'm reliably informed as far as the website tells me, is specializing in the addiction problems of the very rich, which is a very shrewd niche as far as I can tell. What he says may or may not be true. That's not the point. The point is, I was told if ever I acquire skills, don't hustle or peddle in an AA meeting. You keep the two things entirely separate. I've only rarely mentioned what I do for a living, partly for that reason. I don't want to hustle or peddle. On one occasion only, did someone who knew me through AA ask for my services, which are very, very specialized. And it was someone who was sober a very long time, who I'd known for a very long time, who I trusted there wasn't going to be any funny business. It was very much at arm's length. It all went through professional channels. But I wouldn't leverage AA for anything else or vice versa. The two things are so work and AA, completely separate worlds, completely separate worlds. Tradition, some good questions coming in, marvelous. So if you think of a question, do pop it in the chat. The earlier you get it in, the more likely it is we'll get to it. Tradition 9. You want to be organized as much as possible, as much as necessary, but as little as possible for maximum serenity. You don't need a procedure for everything. You don't need a group conscience for everything. You don't need a business meeting for everything. Almost everything can be solved pragmatically by a couple of grown-ups on the fly. You try and legislate, you create more problems. Every time you legislate with a procedure, you create another set of ambiguities. It's a disaster. So it's called the Minimax principle. I won't say where that comes from. You look it up if you like. It's a principle in Czech linguistics. Actually, I will tell you what it is. Jerzy Levy. You want maximum output for minimum effort. Minimax. Maximum output for minimum effort, which means you organize only as much as necessary and absolutely as little as possible. So the script as spare and bare as possible, as few service assignments as possible, as few business meetings and group conferences as you can get away with. The slimmest imaginable agenda to hold back. I've stopped making proposals in groups I go to. I just leave them be. I just want to let the group grow as it is. Almost everything resolves itself with the passage of time. And image that someone used, when all of the billiard balls are flying around the billiard table, or when all the balls are flying around the pool table, you have to wait till they've all come to rest before you decide what the next move is. You do not fling yourself on the table. When all the balls start moving around in an AA group, just let the balls come to rest and then see if there's a problem, and you'll discover, thank God no one intervened. No one came up with a list of proposals to fix it, because it won't fix it. So absolutely minimal organisation, and to leave as much as possible to the discretion of the serving officers. And if they F it up, they F it up. So what? It doesn't matter. All you need for a meeting is a big book, a kettle to boil some water, some cups, some coffee, some milk, and some alcoholics. You don't need much more. You really don't need much more than that. And if you lose the venue, you go to the park. And if the park is too cold, you go to a cafe. It doesn't, or someone's house. It doesn't matter. What matters is the people. It's not the structure. It's not the procedures. It's none of that. What's next? And if you've got problems between people, just deflect it to the next business meeting or group conscience. Don't try and fix it into personal things between people. If it's a genuine group matter, just get the group to fix it instead. Servants serve, they do not govern. I'm going to say that again. Servants serve, they do not govern. What I was taught, and it took me a long time to learn this, I got this wrong for most of my 29 years in AA. My job is to say to the group, thy will be done, not yes, but. Thy will be done. You want it done like this? You have it done like this. No one needs me fiddling with the script. They really don't. There's a group, I'll tell you, this is one of my favorite AA stories. There's a group in London where, I don't know if this term is available in America. In this country, for many years, people would, rather than buying an apartment in Spain, would buy basically 1 week of an apartment in Spain, so that the apartment was owned by 52 people. Each person would get a week of the year or 2 weeks of the year. It was called a timeshare. And this particular group, they started to time the sharing in the meeting. So they timed it at 2 minutes. You had to stop at 2 minutes. And in the script, about 15 years ago, someone made a typo that they said this group, rather than saying this group operates a timed sharing policy, they said this group operates a timeshare policy, which makes it sound as though they're offering shares in apartments in Malaga or something. No one fixed it for 15 years. I think it's still the same. And I think this is really healthy. I think these people do not need to go to an al-anon meeting. They can see that something is wrong and just leave it alone, because it doesn't matter. So what else? Tradition 10. I was at a meeting once where I was with a newcomer Catholic, and the person doing the chair said, I'm a recovering Catholic, ha, 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 and then started mocking Catholicism. Half a dozen other, you say that, one person says that, and everyone comes in like jackdaws afterwards and say, oh, me too, ha, 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 and they say, nasty little stories about nuns or something. And the newcomer at the end said, obviously Catholics are not welcome here. So it's all fun until it's not. So I'm incredibly careful about not saying either positive or negative things about particular religions in meetings. Also, and I made one mistake with the following point once. I've never done it again because I felt so awful after it. I don't signal what my politics are, even like dog whistle, not even below the surface. Just don't even go there. And I don't presume the political or religious leanings or affiliations of the members of a particular group and speak as though we're all on the same page. We may not be. Tradition 11, be the change you want to see, which means if I would like the sharing in a group to be more step focused, well, I'm going to talk about the steps. I don't need to get the group to tell everyone else to do it. And I find that works very well. That gradually people follow, that becomes the culture of the group. If enough people do that, it becomes the culture. You don't need to tell people to do it. And then tradition 12, anonymity. There was a television show many years ago in this country called This Is Your Life, where a famous person would be pounced on out of the blue and dragged into a television studio, and all the people they'd ever met would tell them how wonderful they were for an hour and a half, of a famous person. And there are AA meetings like that where someone speaks and then everyone else gives a review of how good or bad they think their recovery has been. And I saw you when you came in and you were such a mess and you were neurotic and you were violent, but now you have blossomed and you have bloomed. And if you're new, you feel like you've walked into a little dinner party or something, or I don't know what. It's unlike anything else except that show, This Is Your Life. That is what it is like. So if a sponsee of mine is doing a chair, or a sponsor of mine is doing a chair, I do not let the rest of the room know that I have a personal relationship with that person. I speak to them exactly as I would a complete stranger. I might say, great to hear you as usual, or something like that. So that's the most. But no special little in-jokes, and everyone on the level, because it excludes people. There's a New York Times restaurant critic, or there was a restaurateur who was commissioned by the New York Times to write 100 tips for restaurant staffers, and it was so successful, this list of 100 tips for restaurant staffers. They've kept it on the New York Times website, and it is brilliant and transferable to hundreds of other situations in life. One of them, he says, when you're a restaurant server, never flatter anyone at the table because you're simultaneously insulting the rest. So if you flatter the person that's done the chair, so I love to hear you. My ears pricked up when I heard that it was you that was speaking, because you speak honestly. Can you hear what's going on there? There's an implication about how this person responds to everyone else. Flattery has a flip side. So it's all very, very neutral. We talk about the content, not the person. Principles, not personalities. There's a lot more that could be said, but let's get on to some questions. Oh my God, there are a lot in there. What about bringing topics that are not related to the group? Speaking about food obsessions in an MA meeting where the topic is obsessions. Well, very often the answer is baked into the question. If the topic is obsessions, you can illustrate it with an obsession. There you go. Because it's the topic. Next question. You mentioned to be mindful of those who, I'm not sure I understand this. Aaron, if you could reword your question and resend it. I want to address it, but I need to think about that a little more. Millie, what do you suggest when a group or service body ignores traditions and denies it when approached, being told that it is a matter of interpretation or updating to the current time frame? I'm sensing a bigger story behind that question. The traditions are not laws. And as I said, they're not laws, they're not rules, they're principles which groups are encouraged to adhere to. The original history of the traditions, Bill talks about obedience to the unenforceable. If a group veers too far from the traditions, it will fail. And one usually doesn't have to wait anywhere near as long as one thinks one is going to. So there is no one who can approach the group, because intergroup is below the groups in the structure, not above. The top of the structure is the AA groups. Below that is intergroup. Below that is region. Below that is the General Service Conference. And below that is the board. In America, it's intergroup is carved off as a separate thing. You've got groups, and then you've got, I never remember which way around, district, and then area, and then the General Service Conference. Forgive me if I've got district and area the wrong way around. The intergroup serves the group. It doesn't govern it. It doesn't dictate to it. If someone has a problem with a group, the group members need to deal with it. So if I've got a problem within a group, I address that within the group. If the group won't hear it, I can leave. It's marvelous. I don't need to win. I don't need people to acknowledge I'm right. Doesn't matter if I'm right. Doesn't matter. When it's a service body, again, it's a very similar principle. A service body is made up of its member groups. It is up to the group. Let's say an intergroup or a region is misbehaving. That does happen sometimes. It is up to the groups within that intergroup or region to address it within the structure that's provided. It's done from within, not without. Tim, how do you handle recruiters in a group? These situations where a member picks up a resentment or a dozen resentments and or wants to exercise power with rules and tries to recruit others to their cause. I'm laughing because that's such a common thing. A group is only as healthy as its individual members. If lots of people are up for that kind of battling in a group, I don't want to be part of a group that does that. I can't fit. Al-anon, go to 100,000 Al-anon meetings. Other people's alcoholism and mental illness. I didn't cause it. I can't control it. I can't cure it. People are operating on scripts they have no power over. They don't even know that they're doing it. I did not know what I was doing when I was playing those games myself. It can't be fixed. You want to know why old-timers in so many groups, they range for the chairs to be positioned against the side or back walls so they can lean their heads back and just shut their eyes, because it's the only way they can stop themselves from getting in there. And Jim W., sober 65 years, did a talk on Sober Speak, which is a podcast, and he's great. He said, there are a lot of things that I see going on in my group that I don't like, but I don't disturb them. Let them get on with it. So that's the net result of 65 years. So you watch all this happening, you get to watch it. There you go. And when it comes to your vote in the group conscience, you vote as God directs you to vote. That's the simplest way. It gets brought to the group. If the group is sane, the sanity wins out. If it's not, you can go somewhere else. A fellow and I are starting a new LGBTQ group. Any particular advice? I've seen. I had a gay and lesbian group. It was mostly gay for about 12 years in my very early recovery, and it worked because it was very relaxed. No one asked any questions. Anyone that wanted to come could come. We didn't check whether people qualified. How do you start an LGBTQ group? The same way you start any other group. Keep it simple, and there's not a lot that can go wrong. Someone asked about the Cartman drama triangle. Could you please explain again? I'll explain it very briefly. So it's where, okay, so at the core of my alcoholism, let's put it in alcoholic terms. Core of my alcoholism is, if I'm suffering, it's your fault. That's why the step 4 starts with the resentment inventory. I'm the victim, you're the persecutor. And I spent my life recruiting rescuers to rescue me from the persecutor by helping me persecute the persecutor back. And everyone switches. And then the rescuer fails to rescue me, so I persecute the rescuer for not rescuing me from the original persecutor. So now I have 2 persecutors, and in the process, I'm persecuting everyone else. But I'm the victim, and nothing's my fault. It's what I said earlier, 100,000 al-anon meetings. I didn't cause it, I can't control it, I can't cure it, I certainly can't regulate it out of the group. So I just run for the hills. Is there ever a reason to expel someone from a group and deny their return? That's a very good question. The standard AA literature in this country covers that. I would recommend following that to the T. There's the service handbook. There are various pamphlets on that question. I've seen situations where it's warranted. Sexual predation, physical violence, or threats of physical violence. One does have to call the police. I've called the police. But it's used as a last resort. You can bar someone from a group because you're not barring them from the fellowship, unless you're in a small town where there's only one group. Then barring someone from a group effectively bars them from the fellowship, and that's a slightly different question. Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, page 263. Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers talks about, I think it's 263, talks about how when there was a drunk disrupting the meeting, 4 of them would go and sit outside the group with him and talk to him. We've done that. There was a bloke that was sidling up to newcomer women, and it was marvelous. It was like RAF formations, the way the women circled around the newcomer women, and the men, we managed to get the bloke outside the gate and said, you need to stay away from the girls and the women here. If you want to talk about alcoholism, we can go and sit in a cafe with you, but you can't, after this evening's behavior, this can't carry on. We will have a meeting ourselves. Do you want to talk about your alcoholism? We will help you with that. And next week you can come back and behave yourself. So you deal with it robustly. You don't, again, it doesn't need to go, there are ways of dealing with this as adult human beings, rather than having a sort of a kangaroo court and a hearing and a trial. And there's nothing worse for a group than legalizing these issues. Deal with them as human beings. I don't like barring people or banning them. I'd rather deal with it as I just said. And that situation, we didn't need to bar him because he declined the offer of going for coffee with us and talking about his alcoholism, and he never came back to that group. But again, it can't be fixed. The person can't be fixed because they've got problems other than alcohol. If you bar them, they'll just go to another group, which may not be as on the ball, which is why I think it's better to kind of keep them there, to try and form a relationship with them and see if you can actually help the person who is inside the behavior. That is something that can actually, and I've seen that work on occasion. Where are we? I've moved from a thriving group in the city to a small group in the countryside. My home group only has 3 members and rarely sees newcomers, despite a recent poster campaign. It has been suggested we go to other fellowships to look for newcomers, but this does not seem right. Well, I don't think the group can. As a human being, I'll go wherever and be myself, and if people are attracted to that, and so be it. That's something I would totally put in God's hands. But what I have a lot of experience doing public information in AA, and there are lots and lots of ways of doing public information in AA. There are lots of agencies to contact. But more than that, even in rural areas, there are situations where someone has started a small group and they've made it very literature focused, very, very strong. They themselves have traveled to the nearest groups, maybe 50 miles away, 100 miles away. This was all in Texas. So big distances, big hats, big distances. And they got sponsees from there. And then in this tiny little town of 5,000 people, within a couple of years, there is a meeting with 80 or 90 people in, because people are traveling 50 or 100 miles to come to that group. There's Don Pritz says that, would say on his tapes that there is no problem in AA that can't be solved with strong sponsorship. And what that gives rise to is such a rock solid program yourself that your light shines out wherever you go, and people say, whatever you're doing seems to be working. Can you show me how you did what you did? How you solved your problem with work, how you solved your problem with your mother, how you solved. That is the answer to almost everything. It's the same questions where, how do you get people to do service? You can't get people to do service. If they're not doing it spontaneously, any means to get them to do service will fail. It will work temporarily. But again, it's this whole trying to control the alcoholic. It's got to come from the inside. Let me have a look. What else we've got? Should new members to the fellowship be allowed to share? Well, I think I covered this earlier. At my home group, they're actively encouraged to. And the reason I find that so wonderful is because it gives me perspective about why I'm even there. It lets us get to know them, which means that afterwards, or there are 2 face-to-face meetings I go to in London, which are great. And it's not my home group, but they are my 2 face-to-face meetings. And newcomers often share, at one of them, newcomers often share. And you get to know a little bit about them, which means you've got a much better angle in afterwards. It's broken the ice. So the purpose of the sharing in the meeting, there are lots of different reasons why it's helpful for people to share in the meeting. It helps them feel part of it. It helps us get to know them. Yeah, you're hearing less about step 7, but once you've heard 3 or 4 people on step 7, what more is there to say? There's not a lot to say about a lot of the steps. They're actually pretty straightforward. So I like hearing new people. What's the best approach to those who use Intergroup as essentially an HR department trying to disband members or get rid of members? Yeah, again, Intergroup has no authority, none, over groups. So it is not the higher authority to appeal to if something is going wrong in the group. It's all complete. If people think that Intergroup is up, it's not, it's down. And you don't appeal down, you appeal up. What is up from the groups? The individual consciousness of the members and the higher power. The higher authority to appeal to is God. There we go, I've said it. It is God. It is not Intergroup. Jim W. I urge people to listen to this talk on Sober Speak. It's from 2 or 3 weeks ago. talks about his wife, and he said when he was annoyed with her, and he told me the story himself many years ago when I was having difficulties at home. When he was annoyed with her, he would take himself away from out of her sight so she couldn't see it, because he didn't want to make his annoyance with her problem. And he said, I realized that my annoyance with her was about me, not about her. And I had no right to inflict that on her. That was his advice to me. He was married to her for many decades. She died relatively recently. I think they were married for over 65 years as well. And that was his advice to me in my relationship as well. And it's the same in the home group. If I don't like what someone is doing, love and tolerance of others is our code, which means I get to sit there uncomfortable at what someone is doing and what they're saying, and I get to say absolutely nothing. And saying nothing means not wording some clever proposal to post at the group conscience meeting to regulate them, not bringing some kind of kangaroo court at the intergroup meeting. There's one exception to that. The one exception, there was a case with a professional, I say professional, I suppose it's the closest word, thief who stole thousands of pounds from various groups in North London, playing people off against each other. And the intergroup, I think, right, in my opinion, the intergroup was right in notifying groups that groups should maybe think twice before entrusting the treasury to this person. But that was as far as it went. So, but it's an extremely rare situation. Extremely rare situation. Many of the people I remember in the first 10 years, there were many in my home group in my first 10 years. It was it was a catastrophe as a group, but I loved it. Catastrophic group, and it was my home. And the number of disruptive people in that group, most of them died of alcoholism, which is why you want to be kind to them, even though they're disruptive. You work through it. There are ways around it. That there are to deal with things as human beings in an ad hoc way, and not try and turn AA into a criminal justice systems. It's not. Are there any other questions here? I can't see any other questions. We have 5 minutes left. If anyone wants to raise their hand, then they can. Here's one. If a group hosts a weekly speaker, is sharing the identity of the speaker a break in tradition? You don't, as long as you don't say the surname. But there's we do. I mean, this one was advertised with my name on, and I'm in two minds about whether we should even be doing that. I've seen AA conferences where they don't say who the speakers are going to be. I love that. They're like, if you want to come, you come, and you get who we've chosen. If you don't trust us, don't come. I love that. I think it's very good. So my name probably shouldn't be on these little flyer things. Aaron, you got a question. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, my name is Aaron. I'm a grateful member of many fellowships. Question, you spoke about in a group if they're trying to get us to conform and it was something else. I didn't get the other part. But can you give me your experience on what do you mean by trying to get members to conform?
There's a group that I'm aware of where I've spoken there a number of times in another part of the country, where they have a dress code. When you speak from the podium, there's a series of lights on the podium. I think they've got someone to actually build the podium in this way. There's a light that goes off if you go over time. There's a light that goes off if you swear. There's a light that goes off if, and so you're you feel constantly under surveillance. I don't like it. There's a group where, and this is quite a common thing. So groups are perfectly allowed to do this. So some groups nowadays will have a thing. You're not allowed to text during the meeting. You're not allowed to use your mobile phone during the meeting. And there's one group I know where you're not allowed to text, but you are allowed to use your mobile phone to read AA literature to refer to whilst you're sharing, but you're just not allowed to text people. And whenever I've got my phone to look at the big book reading, part of me is thinking, I wonder if anyone is monitoring me in order to tell me off if I break one of the rules. And I'll tell you the funniest thing. So this is meant to reduce disruption. You know what? And the announcement says, if you want to text or call, please leave the room. And a lot more people are getting up and moving around during the meeting now because they're being told not to text. So the last laugh is on the meeting, because they tried to, again, perfect example, you try to regulate people's behavior with a rule, and the fix creates greater disruption than was caused by the thing which is the subject matter of the rule. I was mentally very, very ill when I got to AA. Some people would say, plus ça change, very little has changed since then. But anyway, I was very, very ill when I got here, and I was allowed to be ill. I didn't have to leave. So I love the radical inclusivity of AA. And the chap's moving the furniture to do his job. So I'm gonna stop there. Vicky, do you want to take over to close us off?
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 or $2 a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.